Jess, thank you. I couldn't hear all that Jess said, but I hope she said, among other things, that she's one reason I'm here, because back when I was in the House, Jess was on my staff, and we were able to write legislation at the time to address a real problem in our country, which was drug abuse and drug addiction. I hate to say it, but today it's far worse. And the heroin and prescription drug addiction has gripped our state and our country in ways that were not imaginable even a decade ago. And you see behind me families who have come together to channel their grief into something constructive, and I thank you for that. And I know it's hard, and I see the photographs. And I just talked to Joyce Gerber of Akron, Ohio, who's here, and talked to her about her nephew who tragically died from an overdose, and her son who's in recovery. And sadly, all over this country today, there are people who are affected in fundamental ways by this addiction. We have to act. Washington will not solve the problem. It's not going to be solved in this building behind me or at the White House, but we can be better partners. I'm convinced of that. And that's what the CARE legislation is all about. I applaud the House for acting 18 separate bills, all bipartisan. The CARE legislation and the House legislation is actually very similar. There's enough common ground that we should be able to pull together and have a conference quickly, get it to the president, and more importantly, get it to our communities to begin to help right away. There are about 129 Americans who will die today of overdoses, and there are 129 families here today, representing those 129 families who around America are suffering a loss of a loved one. Those individuals will never be able to achieve their God-given purpose. Their lives were struck down too soon. But it's much more than just the tragedy of these overdoses. It's those who are wounded. I mentioned Joyce Gerber and her son who's in recovery. When I'm talking to people who are in recovery, they tell me about the fact that the drugs become everything. And all of us are affected with friends and family and coworkers. When the drugs become everything, the family is torn apart. When the drugs become everything, work is abandoned. When the drugs become everything, we do see a huge increase in crime in order to support that habit. So this is far higher casualties than just the horrible loss of a life to overdose. This issue affects every zip code in America. It knows no zip code. It affects every aspect of our economy. It knows no limits. And it is a disease. One of the things that I think the legislation in the House and the Senate has done that goes well beyond the specifics of helping with regard to recovery and treatment and helping with regard to prevention to keep people from making choices in the first place that are detrimental to them and their families. But one thing this legislation does beyond that is it establishes the fact that addiction is a disease and should be treated as such. Just like we treat other diseases, cancer is treated as a disease. Addiction needs to be treated as a disease as well. I think it also helps to remove the stigma that's associated with addiction. I was at a treatment center in Ohio on Monday, talking to women who were pregnant and who had come to this center to be able to ensure that they could, in fact, get their lives back on track and deal with their addiction, but also ensure that their babies would be born healthy and that their babies would be able to have a role model to be able to lead a productive and full life. That's where the hope is. So with all the discouraging data out there about overdoses and addiction, there is hope. Treatment and recovery does work and can work. And our legislation is meant to bring in the best practices from all over the country and decide where the federal funds ought to go to be able to make the biggest impact. It's evidence-based. We spent 3 years putting it together. We had 5 conferences here in Washington, bringing in experts, including some who are with us, like Jessica, from around the country, to determine what is the best way to help law enforcement, what is the best way to help these pregnant women and to avoid more babies who are born with addiction, what is the best way to get people into a medication-assisted treatment program that works and into a longer-term recovery plan that works? So this legislation is important for these 129 families behind us. It's also important for every single state, every congressional district, every community in America, all of which are being affected by this epidemic. We can turn the tide if we pull together as a country. And Washington has a role to play to be a better partner with state and local government and with our nonprofits who are out there in the trenches doing the hard work. That's what we'll do over the next few weeks here, is pulling together, get this conference done, get this legislation to the president, and most importantly, get it to these communities and these families who desperately need our help. Thank you.